right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, I should say. My name is John Manley. Myself, my partner Vince Finaldi, which is to my left, Cheryl Garza, Tom Moore with the Senator's firm, and Jane Riley acted as counsel in this case. Vince and I were liaison counsel, and you're looking at the lawyers that primarily litigated these cases. We took over 60 depositions, examined millions of pages of documents, and I don't even know how many motions, trips to court. It was the most contentious and toughly litigated case certainly of my career. More importantly than us, I want to introduce today some of George Tyndall's survivors. And what strikes me today is you have generations of women standing before you. I'd like to introduce Allison Rowland. If each survivor would raise her hand, please. Allison Rowland. Allison is a public policy analyst. She has a PhD and an MA in public policy from USC. She met George Tyndall in 1993. Audrey Nufziger, raise your hand. Audrey is a senior deputy district attorney and sex crimes prosecutor in the Ventura County District Attorney's Office. She's a graduate of USC Law School. She was abused by Dr. Tyndall in 1992. Lucy Chi. Lucy has an MA in healthcare management from USC. She graduated in 2014, and she was abused by Dr. Tyndall in or around that time period. Christy Leach. Christy is a student health administrator. She has a Bachelor of Science in Business from USC in 1998 and was abused in or around that time period. Sarah Slavitz. Did I screw that up again?
Yep.
Say it.
Slavitz.
She's an accountability architect. She has a bachelor's degree, a master's of science from Harvard in 1998, and a bachelor's degree from USC in 1996. And finally, Jamisha Morgan. Jamisha is an attorney. She graduated from the law school in 2018. And when you see Jamisha and Audrey, and you look at the years in between, there are literally thousands of women that man assaulted in that health center. And worse, and I want this to be clear, USC and senior administrators at USC in the health center and otherwise knew. The press materials that USC put out in 2018 that this was somehow a mystery to them were a damned lie. And we proved it. Today, I'm proud to announce an $852 million settlement for 710 women. If you add the settlements in that where lawyers took less, it's $1.1 billion. The settlement in this case is 70% higher than the Larry Nassar case of $500 million, although the per case value is the same. And my firm was lead counsel in that case as well. The 233 brave women we represent, many of which can't be here, but whose voices are represented by these women, spoke to USC when they filed their complaints. And they spoke to USC and its board and its leadership and said, we're not going silently into the night with your ridiculous class action. We will not be silenced. One of the things I'm proudest of with this settlement is there is no confidentiality agreement, which are common for these cases and are wrong. These women insisted on it, insisted that there be no confidentiality. The culpability of USC here is legion. And I hope that somebody from the media will seek to get the materials with the court that are sealed. The media in this case was really important. In fact, I would say heroic, because but for the efforts of the LA Times and other outlets, George Tyndall would never have been exposed. The media gets a lot of criticism, some deserved, but here they served a critical purpose for the community, because if that story hadn't come out, he would still be doing it, or his secrets would still be there. He might actually be treating people in other hospitals. I have given credit publicly to Carol Folt, the president of USC, and Byung Kim, their general counsel. She's been there a very short time, and they were both instrumental in settling this case. They wanted the case settled. However, there are many on the Board of Trustees who we believe did not. There are many in the administration and on the Board of Trustees who don't belong at that university. Not all, but some. And Dr. Folt has quite a challenge on her hands, because the problem at USC is culture. They put prestige, fundraising / money, and the university brand ahead of the well-being of its students for 30 years. It cost them dearly. And I say this as an alumnus of USC. I graduated in 1986. Things need to change. The most important thing that I hope history tells us about this record-breaking settlement, which is the largest personal injury settlement against a university and the largest sex abuse settlement in American history, is this will no longer be tolerated. USC is not the only university that has a dirty doctor. UCLA has one. We know that there was one at Johns Hopkins. We know there was one at Michigan State, Larry Nassar. This needs to change. This is a phenomenon in medicine that needs to be exposed. And the American Medical Association and the medical associations around the country need to stop opposing legislation to disclose this. I also want to say personally, it's been the greatest honor of my life to represent these women and make this happen. But this didn't happen because of our great legal team or because of any one lawyer. It happened because of them, and they deserve the credit. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the people who really need to be heard from today, and I'll start with Allison Rowland.
Thank you all for being here. There's so many layers to USC's betrayals that it's a little hard to know where to begin. There was that slowly dawning horror of being trapped in a room with my feet in the stirrups, with a supposed doctor who was getting angry at me because he didn't like my questions. He didn't like my objections. He tried to pretend that everything he was doing was normal and necessary. I was lucky because I was a grad student, and this wasn't my first gynecology appointment, so I knew enough not to go back. I didn't know that I wasn't alone. And I was shaken up when I finally got out of that office. The staff person I complained to on my way out the door looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Oh no, he's a good doctor." And that said it all for me. That was 25 years ago, back when the term sexual predator wasn't even part of most people's vocabulary. And yet, the documents show that USC already knew there was a problem with this guy. They already had received complaints about him that should have cost him and his supervisors their jobs. Instead, before I got there, and for decades after I left, USC had this vicious indifference to their students' health and safety. It turns out I wasn't another piece of meat just for Tyndall. I was really just a piece of meat for USC as well. Their president and the Board of Trustees had so many opportunities to make things right, and they resisted it at every turn. It's hard to come to terms with the fact that USC preferred to spend massive amounts of money on damage control and on their fancy lawyers, and they really told us just to move on. They didn't want to reckon with decades of senseless horror that they had allowed to go on with their knowledge. I am so proud to be a part of this settlement because we have done our part to make it no longer seem cheaper and easier for cynical organizations like USC to find ugliness in their midst and just turn away. This is the message I want to send today. Powerful people at powerful institutions can and must be held to account. This is the way that will stop the next Tyndall before he even gets started. Thank you very much.
Next, we'll hear from Lucy Chi.
I want to thank all of you for being here today and for listening to us when no one else would. Today's settlement while important, actually brings me quite a bit of sadness. It's been nearly 3 years since the LA Times published the report about what George Tyndall did to us for nearly 30 years and how USC covered it up. Even while staff at the student clinic exposed him. USC allowed thousands of women to be abused by the gynecologist, and when they found out, they covered it up. They aided and abetted all of those sexual assaults. And no one in the administration, in leadership at USC has been held accountable. The only person that has been charged is George Tyndall. Now, part of the reason this happened is because of former DA Jackie Lacey's cozy relationship with USC. She graduated from USC Law School and met with them multiple times when these allegations came out. She declined to charge them over and over while we asked her to. Now that we have a new DA in office, it's my hope that DA George Gascon will take us seriously. If not for justice for the victims, at least show future predators and those who would enable them that there is a price to pay when you avert your eyes and you ignore what's happening. I also call on the new California Attorney General, Rob Bonta. Rob Bonta is Asian American like me and like so many of USC's victims. George Tyndall, and there's evidence of this, George Tyndall specifically preyed upon Asian women. He paid special attention to me because I was Asian. And I call on Attorney General Rob Bonta, please, this crime on Asian Americans has been happening for 30 years while everyone stood by and did nothing. Please do something to hold those at USC accountable. I want to thank the media for all their support, and I especially want to thank the journalists at the LA Times for what is truly heroic work. Thank you.
Next up will be Sarah Slavitz. Did I screw it up again? Did I screw it up again?
No, I didn't hear you.
You're next.
Oh, great. Sorry, but. I'm Sarah Slavitz, in case you did screw it up. And also, I went to Harvard Law School and got a degree there, not in something else, just in case. Thank you. The summer before I arrived at USC, I went to the gynecologist for the first time. I was told that I had a mild dysplasia, and that it could be precancerous, and that I would have to monitor it regularly to make sure. And so began my twice-yearly visits with Dr. Tyndall. On the plus side, I didn't wind up having cancer. On the minus side, I was groomed, harassed, and assaulted a couple times for each of my college years. Perhaps even worse, I encouraged my friends to do the same. When this news broke at USC, I was astonished. It never occurred to me that I'd been one of tens of thousands of women. And the first thing I did was call the number listed in hopes that I'd be able to learn whether the university I'd love had pictures of my vagina in their safe for over 2 decades after I'd graduated. Because they could not tell me, and in fact, to this day, have never gotten back to me about it, and because from the very first moments of that call, they were clearly and obviously aiming to protect USC rather than me, I sought representation from John Manley and Jane Riley. I've made few better decisions than turning down USC's settlement offer. To allow this university to control this process would have only deepened the betrayal and my sense of powerlessness, and undermined the change and accountability necessary to create different future outcomes. Because of this experience, I'd urge survivors at other universities like UCLA to refuse these self-serving settlements and to demand justice publicly for all of those who can't. Though I'm grateful that this case has been settled, I still feel betrayed by how USC has treated me and tens of thousands of women. Perhaps I should know better by now, but I'd naively thought that USC could and would step up to take responsibility for the harm it caused so many of us. Instead of acting with integrity, they hid documents and never even released the results of their own internal investigation. I'm also grateful that the City of LA is prosecuting this case, and will hope that my city and California's new Attorney General, Rob Bonta, will step up where the Trojan family has only continued to fail, and hold the folks at USC who knew of Tyndall's contact, failed to report it, and even actively covered it up, responsible for the harm that they contributed to. As for USC, much change is still required. On their end, USC has begun to make good on their promise to reform their board of trustees. But as it stands, these changes appear to be cosmetic rather than substantive. Yes, they've reduced the size such that there are now only 44 voting members rather than 60. But of those 44 voting trustees, more are billionaires than anything else. 32 of these people are men, 33 are white, and only one member is only 58 years old, and only one is a black member. In a city where only 22% vote for Republicans and 72% are registered as Democrats, it's worth noting that more than half the board are registered Republicans. It begs the question, who is it that USC aims to include? And although there are only 44 trustees voting now, there are also 32 life trustees, of which 25 are men, 28 are white, 5 are younger than 78, and 0 are black. If USC is to change, it must start at the top. Until the board reflects and includes the entire USC community, why would anything change? Unless and until students, faculty, and non-billionaire alumni and survivors of the harm they've caused for 4 generations of women are included in the governance of USC, why would our future look like anything but our past? If tens of thousands of women, of victims of assault, are not enough to command change, what would? And if not now, when? Thank you.
Next up will be Christy Leach.
Members of the media, thank you so much for being here. The moment that I walked into USC's health center, George Tyndall quickly discerned the vulnerable state of my condition. Feverish from a cold that had lasted too long, he handed me some antibiotics and talked me into my first gynecological exam. But George Tyndall knew that what made me most vulnerable was that behind the closed door of his office, he could do whatever he wanted to me, and USC would do nothing. Walking out of the health center that day, I had no idea how far-reaching the effects of suffering and loss would be. As a professional, a stunted career. As a wife, lack of trust towards an incredibly loyal and faithful husband. As a mother, fear and anxiety projected upon my children. For survivors of sexual assault, healing comes at a premium as the cost of treatment is very expensive. USC's class action settlement, along with class action settlements like it, seem promising and generous. until you read the fine print. If survivors of that settlement are only guaranteed $2,500, which at best could cover about 10 sessions. If survivors decide to pursue more compensation, they must share their story with a practitioner at USC's choosing. Worst of all, the institution is permitted to continue dodging responsibility by not having to share evidence of the crimes committed on their institution. As a survivor coming forward, it is imperative for your healing and mental health that you choose carefully the professionals that are going to prioritize your well-being. If you are a survivor of sexual assault, there is healing, hope, and justice for you as well. Today's announcement comes with a statement that harboring a sexual predator in an institution comes with a high penalty and should not be tolerated. This is not a fight that we have chosen, but together as sexual assault survivors, we can come together to make a statement that institutions harboring sexual predators will not be tolerated. Thank you so much.
Next is Audrey Nufziger.
Thank you for being here and hearing these survivors' stories. There's stories that need to be heard and need to be told. I'm one of the first women to see him. I saw him in 1990. And none of these women here should have ever seen him after I saw Dr. Tyndall. Like many, I was inexperienced in what a gynecological exam would entail. So when he closed the door and locked it, I thought it was odd, but what did I know? When he took his camera out to take pictures of me and asked me to participate in those photos, well, what did I know? When he lied to me and told me I had a sexually transmitted disease, I trusted him. When he told me disgusting stories about oral sex with women in the Philippines while I was in stirrups on the table, naked, I knew this wasn't right. When he treated me, I didn't realize that was all just a big lie. And those lies and that shame followed me for the rest of my life until the LA Times story broke. And I got to realize for the first time that I was part of the largest sexual predator case in modern era. And as a sex crimes prosecutor, it was a very sobering moment to know that that man had his hands all over me and everything he did was a lie. I had carried my medical records with me. When I graduated in 1992, I went and got them. I was mad and concerned, and I wanted to report on him, but I never did. Like so many other sex abuse survivors, never report. And when I opened my records, I saw the evidence of his lie in the negative lab report for what he had done to me. The labs are negative. This completely changed my life, what he had done to me, and how I lived my life from that point on, how I raised my daughters, how I don't trust male doctors, and my daughters won't see them. The things I had to tell my husband, the way I looked at myself for a long time, all because USC allowed this sexual predator to exist on their campus and care for their women, their Trojan family, for almost 3 decades. It's inexcusable. I am grateful for the Los Angeles Police Department and the incredible work they've done to interview hundreds of women to help bring some sense of justice to us. I am deeply concerned about the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office and the way this case has been handled and not handled. Because while in Michigan, with Dr. Larry Nassar, at least 6 high-ranking officials have been indicted criminally for charges, no one other than Dr. Tyndall has been indicted for anything. And there's plenty of criminal blame to go around here. Had these survivors and others taken the class action, USC would have accomplished what they set out to with the class action, which was to sweep everything under the rug. Nothing to see here. But because we stood strong, we stood with each other, we stood with California legislators and changed laws, because we joined together, depositions happened. The records are now there of all the people in the top brass and what they did and what they didn't do, what they knew and when they knew it. And I also call on the new California Attorney General and the new Los Angeles District Attorney, as a public servant, as a professional career prosecutor, I call on them to do their jobs, to get that information, to investigate the crimes that have occurred here beyond this sexual predator. He will be held to account. Of that, I have no doubt. But there are others who need to have their day in court, and that will bring full justice and accountability to the Trojan family and send a message far and wide that you can't buy your way out of justice. Justice is coming for you. Thank you.
Our last survivor to speak will be Jamisha Morgan.
Thank you all again for having us. This is, to say the least, a very overwhelming moment. Audrey speaks about being assaulted by George Tyndall in 1990. I was born April of 1993. So we are talking about decades of the perversion of the patient-physician relationship, and something that we all know could have been prevented. But USC equally perverted the sanctity of the student relationship and the trust that parents and students put in an institution's hands when we choose that institution to further our education. I am just thankful foremost for our attorneys who provided wise counsel and fought tooth and nail and supported us and gave us this sisterhood. Because when I left USC just May of 2018 and this story broke, I still felt alone. I'd also like to thank you all for continuing to cover this story, and I implore you to continue to do so. This is only the beginning. George Tyndall walked away from USC with a severance payment while we were still grappling with understanding what we'd experienced. USC continued to hide information, to lie to the media, and to intentionally disparage what we knew to be our truths. I have been looking for more information from the district attorney's office. I received a call December 2020 that told me due to budget cuts, the sex crimes investigative unit would be dismantled and the detective that had been working with me on my case would no longer be working with me. I've reached out to ADA Mueller requesting updates. I've also waited to see if they would reach out to provide more information as to the ongoing prosecution of George Tyndall, and I've received nothing. That does not leave me very hopeful that the individuals who were complicit in covering up Tyndall's abuse would also be held responsible for their actions. And so while we stand here memorializing a very momentous moment, a moment that says this solidifies what we know to be our truth, what we experienced and what we hope will become justice for students everywhere. And as we continue to push USC to abide by the full terms of the settlement, both this one and the class action, which includes changes in policy and how students and sexual assault allegations are handled on campus, we also implore you all to stay involved in this case and continue to advocate for justice for all of us. Thank you.
I challenge you to find a more eloquent, brilliant group of women anywhere in this country. You know, George Tyndall, when he left in 2016, received a nearly $200,000 settlement. The highest settlement in the class action is $96,000. That is an obscenity. The final thing I want to say is Rick Caruso, the chairman of the USC Board of Trustees and a fixture in this community, some say he wants to be mayor, promised the women behind me and the hundreds of others, thousands of others actually, that USC was going to do an independent investigation, and indeed they did. It was by a law firm called Melvin and Myers. And he promised it was going to be made public. He broke his promise, and he said, I can't do it because the attorneys won't let me because there's litigation. Well, Mr. Caruso, the litigation's over. Release the report. With that, I'll turn it over to you for questions. Ma'am. So not every survivor will get $1.2 million. It's going to be allocated by a retired judge who has extensive experience allocating the funds like this. That's exactly what happened in Nassar. We don't know what the high and the low is, but I can tell you my suspicion is the low will be in the low to mid six figures and the high will be multi-million. I don't know where that ends up, but that's not up to me. The settlement, in terms of the figures and how it came out, I will tell you that there are lawyers holding press conferences today that I've never seen in this case. Never attended a deposition and never did anything except sign up clients. So we negotiated the settlement. My partner, Vince Finaldi, primarily negotiated it, and I'll let him deal with the specifics of the math.
So the major global settlement is 702 women, and it's just over $842 million. There was a side settlement with another firm of another 8 women, and that was for 9.2. So the total number comes out to $852 million. It is a global settlement. It resolves all of the state court litigation. The settlement will be paid out in both instances through 2 payments. First payment in August, the next payment the next August. Did you have any other questions regarding the, how the settlement works? Yes, so when you add in the global settlement, which was reached today, in addition to several settlements of Tyndall cases that had occurred during the course of the state court litigation, a few of the attorneys peeled off. Their clients agreeing to take lower sums than the 1.2 average that we ended up achieving here. You add those along with the class action settlement, and the total is $1.1 billion, just over it, for abuse by one man. None of the state court litigation, which was resolved for $852 million, were part of the class action. Not a single one. Any other questions? Sure. Sure. The earliest was in the early 90s. The earliest one was 1989. And it spanned all the way till 2016. I believe the youngest one was 17 years old. The oldest one was in her 40s. Yes?
Other questions?
So it's being paid by USC and USC's insurers. Another responsible party who was part of the action was George Tyndall. George Tyndall has spent everything he has on his defense in the criminal case and did not have funds to contribute.
Yes.
Yes, Dr. George Tyndall is part of the settlement. No. Yeah, that's going to be decided by the criminal court. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Tyndall was deposed in the case and asserted the Fifth Amendment for almost all questions.
Thank you, folks. Thank you.